Welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast with Ollie Rupp. Today's guest is Jason Barnwell, who just finished an incredible 15-year stint at Microsoft as the GM and Associate General Counsel of Monetization and Business Planning. Jason's career is nothing short of inspiring. He talked to me about his early years in big law and his transition to Microsoft. He also spoke with me about how much mindset matters and seizing opportunities, embracing change, even if it means being uncomfortable. Jason's next role will be as the Chief Legal Officer at Agiloft, one of the leading contract management solution platforms. With that said, we hope you enjoy the episode. Hey, Jason, welcome to the podcast.
Happy to be here.
How is Seattle, Washington this time of the year?
We are enjoying fall. It is sweater weather, lots of fun colors, pumpkin patches, apples, the whole deal. It is wonderful.
Nice. I'm here in the Bay Area, so it's kind of similar to that vibe, I guess.
I used to live in the Bay Area, and I will say that there were fewer distinct seasons than there are in the Pacific Northwest. But yes, the Bay Area is back.
Nice. Well, let's dive right into it. We'll start with sort of your background and starting with your education, and then we'll go into your experience. You've been spending 15 years at Microsoft, so excited to get into that. But you attended MIT, and I'd love to hear about what that experience was like. I know you graduated in 2000, right as the dot-com boom was going off. So would love to hear about how that was graduating then.
It was a lot of fun, and I guess I should note, I graduated with a mechanical engineering degree, and so I do not have a conventional path to becoming a software engineer, which is what I did. I ended up working in the software industry as a software engineer for about 5 years before going to law school, and it was very interesting to catch kind of the end of the boom and then rolling into the bust. But being a software engineer at that time was a lot of fun because there was just a lot of space and room to roam. But I'm also functionally self-taught, and so it was always very interesting to learn from more conventionally instructed and maybe even more disciplined. But I will say that those of us who are self-taught often tend to be very scrappy and creative, but that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I noticed in your background, you did some patent examiner intern work in while you were in college, focusing on automotive control systems. So, I mean, were you thinking about law school or were you thinking about going into the industry of mechanical engineering or what were you thinking?
It's funny how the world works. I was in undergrad and I was back home for the summer, and I went back and I worked at my old job just to make some money. And I ended up selling a gentleman a pair of shoes. And we just got to talking a little bit because, when you're selling, you want to understand what the customer's about and, develop rapport and empathy. And we ended up, just chatting a little bit more. And he's like, "So what are you about?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm back home for the summer. I'm in engineering school." He's like, "Oh, I was an engineer." I was like, "Was an engineer? What do you do now?" He's like, "I'm an intellectual property attorney." And I was like, "What's that?" And it turns out this gentleman, he started off as a chemical engineer and he became an IP attorney. And he took 10 minutes of his life and he explained what he did. He explains, the general concepts of intellectual property, really the idea that you can protect and monetize ideas. And I thought that was absolutely compelling. It was just so interesting. And it really set the hook in me. And so, Aaron Retzer, thank you so much for putting me on the path. And then I ended up going back to school and I took some IP classes at the management school, which was kind of off the path of engineering, but it was they fit together really nicely, and I was like, this is really interesting stuff. And so I then did land a job at the United States Patent and Trademark Office as an examining intern, and that was a pretty wild experience because I was so young and I didn't know anything. And these basically some IP attorneys took pity on me and they kind of took me around and they showed me the ropes. And at, from that point, I presumed I would go to law school. And my starting presumption was that I'm going to go be a patent litigator, and that's ultimately what I kind of move forward in life, presuming at some point I'll go get some industry experience and, kind of learn a little bit more of the world. But eventually the plan was to go to law school and become an IP litigator. And so ultimately I did end up going to law school. And I will say that the training to be an engineer does not always prepare you best for being a law school student. It turns out, say, in engineering, it's like, oh, there's an answer, and in law, it's like, no, no, these are all the reasons it's not the answer. And so it's a very, it's kind of an anti-pattern if you're trying to make stuff, but it makes you a better advocate and better analysis.
Yeah.
And so the first summer, I went and I did litigation, and it turns out that it just didn't really track with how I think about solving problems or really how I think about creating value. And so I ended up going back the second year and completely retooling, thinking like, hey, I was a software engineer. There were probably lawyers that did stuff for that company. And so that ultimately put me on the path to being a startup lawyer. So I did emerging companies and venture capital work. And I did that first summer and moved up to Seattle for a firm to do that. And it was just fantastic. So one of the best things about that kind of practice is it's hyper entrepreneurial, right? Like you tend to take on the characteristics and the practices of the business you support. And so I will say I was probably committing malpractice daily back in those days, but it was so fun because it was such a tight loop between when you could do something and you could create value for the clients, and so it just felt kinda magical. So I'll pause there and give you a chance to say some words too.
That's cool. That's what a cool story. I do want to ask about something. Like there's a good amount of students, but not a lot who have STEM degrees that go on to get their JDs. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that like in what ways is that an advantage or a disadvantage? And one more thing, I know with big law recruiting right now, like for folks that are going the IP route, the STEM degree is like something that they really look for. If not, it's required. So, what are your thoughts on that?
So my general thoughts are it is good to understand how you can bring together the intersection of capabilities that are scarce or rare and that have a durable competitive advantage. And so when you think about, so if you are an English major and you go to law school, you are very well prepared for the pedagogical process of law school. But I will just say that the effectively you're sharpening an existing view. And by the way, this is I'm going to be a bit extreme and ridiculous on this to kind of tease apart what you're talking about. This is of course a spectrum, and like so, let's just embrace that. One of the advantages of having a STEM degree is you think very differently. And let me make this more concrete. So there's a joke that I often tell, which is kind of a joke, but I think it has some explanatory value. So if you go to a lawyer and you show them two things that look similar, they will keep looking closer and closer until those two things can be distinguished. If you go to an engineer and you show them two things that look dissimilar, they will keep backing up until there is some level of abstraction that makes them similar. These are diametrically opposed kind of thinking models. And if you can inhabit both of those spaces at the same time competently, it gives you a very, very interesting view on the world. And if you can switch between those phases, or even better, you can composite them, then all of a sudden you have the ability to be both a critical thinker and a systems thinker. So I would say even beyond the IP route, which is a great application of these backgrounds, I would say as a general matter, there is a benefit to being able to inhabit both of those spaces if you were thinking about solving the most complex problems, because you absolutely need that sharp lawyer knife that can help you cleave apart two things that look very similar. But the ability to basically perceive the system that is operating to find patterns, repetition, signals, and rhythms, that gives you a completely different and complementary set of tools that you can use to solve problems. And I think those become even more valuable as a set of strong complements the more complex the world gets. So that is my kind of high level take on it.
What a fascinating perspective. It sounds like it definitely adds a lot of value, in sort of in nuanced ways. So great to hear your perspective on that. I am curious. So you worked as a software engineer, then you went to law school, and after graduating from USC, you had worked in the Bay Area previously, and this was still, I think when the tech industry was booming. But you went back to Seattle. Was that like a for family ties or for other reasons?
So we lived in the Bay Area before law school. So my wife and I ended up we both went to SE for graduate school. And we thought about moving back to the Bay Area, but the real answer is we felt priced out. Like it was so expensive even back then. And we had a very dear friend who'd moved up to Seattle to go work for Amazon, and she sent us a PowerPoint deck. Uh, and so we'd a bunch of us had been friends in the Bay Area, and several folks had moved up to the Pacific Northwest and Seattle specifically. And she basically made the business case for like, well, if you liked living in the Bay Area, but you're looking for better purchasing power, there's this place that you might want to check out. And so between the, I think, sec I think it was between the 1st and 2nd years of law school, um, we ended up, basically doing a tour of a bunch of cities on the West Coast, and we effectively went and interviewed them. We went and bopped around and, saw what the vibe was like, and ultimately, we ended up deciding on Seattle because it had, a wonderful intersection of it had lots of great jobs, it had, people we loved, and it had things that were really fun to do, and so ultimately, that's how we came to Seattle, and I think 17 years later? Oh,
Yeah. No, it makes perfect sense. Seattle's really beautiful. I really enjoy it as well. And I know you went to Heller Ehrman right after law school, and I've heard of some like I've heard a little bit of background about what happened to that firm. But you were there for just over a year. I'm curious, like what your experience was like, other than all the malpractice you committed.
I probably shouldn't put that as the tagline, but yeah. Uh, so Heller was this, storied and amazing firm, and specifically, I joined what was known as the venture law group, within Heller. They had acquired, VLG, and Heller had some of the best attorneys I've ever met. I'm still friends with so many of them. They're at all kinds of different firms now, but it really was this fabulous firm with, like, a really, like, interesting culture, and the practice group that I joined had these folks who were just the best, and some of them had been at, Brobeck and some other firms that had challenges, and so they were hyper resilient, but one of the things that was the absolute best about being in the VLG practice was basically from day 0, I was allowed to go hunt for opportunity and literally go meet clients, and I wasn't gonna get origination credit or anything like that because I was, a first-year associate, but it was probably one of the most empowering set of partners that you can imagine in as much as they're like, "Look, like, if you feel like you can give the client a good enough answer to the question and you can be diligent about it, like, go make value." And they were basically like, "And look, just come talk to me and I will, make sure you're not gonna be malpractice." But it was so incredibly empowering, and the folks who I practiced with there, like, the other associates, were just these amazing people who were so capable, and we had such a collegial environment, and it was a little bit like a pirate ship in as much as, like, you kinda go out on adventures and, like, go do cool work, and it was super fun, and so 11 months into that, uh, Heller, basically dissolved, and, the partners, that I worked for, what they did was a really, really rigorous review of lots of different firms to figure out what was the right platform to move to, and they were incredibly thoughtful about that, and they ended up selecting Cooley, and so that is how I ultimately, ended up, going to Cooley. We were absorbed, and we refounded the Seattle, Cooley office. I think it technically the original one might have been in Kirkland, but, we were in Seattle, and it was like being in a startup where you are getting the clients over and like getting them onto the new platform. Everything's a little broken. You're wearing every possible hat. Like literally, I was doing like IT work just as like a stopgap measure, just like because I used to be an IT guy back in the day, and like, but it was literally, if you could pull on an oar and help the boat move forward faster, like go pull that oar. And honestly, it was scary, um, but it was so energizing because it felt like what you were doing had real stakes. Like it was not you're on this, you know, guaranteed like it's all going to be fine. It's like, nope, your contribution to this enterprise really matters. It is meaningful. And again, it gets back to that concept of being able to see that tight loop between I do something and value gets created. That was a pretty special time. Ironically, I think it was probably easier on some of us who had been practicing the least amount of time because we just didn't know any better. And I think it was probably rougher on people who had more established patterns because, you know, so people who've been at there've been people who've been at Heller for tens of years and having your life uprooted like that is is a violent and it can be, a little traumatic experience. Like if you had built your life around something and all of a sudden it disappeared, that's really hard. And so I still remember the day being in the Columbia Tower when the office managing partner like gathered us all in a room and basically said, the firm is no longer a going concern. We are now in dissolution mode. Start figuring it out. And so you get real clarity of focus and purpose when things are existential, right? Like, and so I still have like so much affection for the people who I went through that with together because I was like, adversity is a bonding experience, and that was very bonding.
That's crazy. It sounds like a super formative experience. And you speak so highly of the attorneys that you were surrounded by and that were giving you guidance. Can you talk more? Can you speak more to like, how do you balance when you're starting as an associate, getting thrown in the deep end versus getting training, getting, having a lot of oversight, a lot of guidance? Like, it sounds like it was more leaning towards the Wild West for you, but things have probably changed, especially at a firm like Cooley now. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, my Cooley experience is probably it may be very different from what it is today, right? I'm far removed from it. So the thing that I would offer as an associate that I think accelerated the process of getting to minimum viable lawyer was do your best to frame what is the client trying to achieve. And I realize this sounds incredibly basic, but one of the first places that I think counselors get something wrong is by not listening to the objective. What is the client trying to solve? What is so they ask a question, and your follow up question might be, "I'm going to do this thing for you, and then what are you going to do with it?" And the reason that's really important is you're trying to literally scope what is the value that I'm creating for this other person. And so let's take this from the abstract to the concrete. I remember this one time, uh, the CFO for one of our the companies that we counseled, he basically was asking about 83B elections, uh, which is we're not gonna get into too much now, but it's basically a tax election for equity. And so I go and I write him this ornate, uh, beautiful memo, and I go to the partner, and it's like, yeah, this is right, like, all the things. And so I go back to him and I deliver this memo. He's like, "Oh, thank you. This is great." And it turns out like he just needed like a sentence for an email to someone. He he did not need the memo. Like he was very gentle and kind with me, but I think had I understood what he was trying to accomplish, I would have gotten him a good answer, but the answer format would have looked different. And I don't think he needed coverage on the entire element. He just needed to get this question answered. And I didn't do a good job in that moment because I didn't take the time to understand what are you trying to accomplish. So as basic as it sounds, it is literally understand what is the valuable for the client by understanding what they're going to do with the things that they're asking you to do. And then it turns into really a question of how do you scope. So then the next level is like, what level of confidence does the client need? Now, this is where I think I'm now I can switch hats and say, as in-house counsel, like, there's sometimes I need like a 99% answer, and there's sometimes I'm literally just like spot checking a hip shot, right? Where I'm just gonna like shoot from the hip. I'm like, is this crazy? Because it's a two-way door. Like we're taking a decision that we're just doing something directional. And so again, understand like what is the severity of the consequence if we get this wrong. Like that's a useful thing to kind of understand as you're doing that. And so as you start kind of getting a better handle on how to scope the problem, then that means that it shapes how you actually do the work, the format that you do it in, like the number of checks that you go through. Because if what if somebody's looking for something that is functionally deterministic, then like, okay, we're going to spend a lot of time on it, and like, oh, we're going to like pin it down. If somebody's like, like I'm going into a meeting and I just need like like a gut check. I'm like, this isn't crazy, right? That's a very different thing. Um, and so I would say it's as weird as it sounds, if you're entering the profession, the most valuable thing that you can spend time on is really being patient with yourself and having the confidence to ask those follow-up questions. Because the concern that I had was I'm going to look stupid. And so I need to look smart and all these other things. And it turns out that if you ask questions, it tends to make you better regarded, uh, and so I think that's kind of the big takeaway that I had entering the practice is like ask great questions that help home in on what are the characteristics of value that you're going to add to how you actually do the work that ultimately delight the customer.
I think it's a really powerful lesson. Would you say that maybe working with emerging companies, you get more reps and you get a little bit more trial and error? So,
100%.
yeah,
So one of the really interesting things about emerging company work is, so I think at Cooley, I was running a portfolio of like 35 or 40 companies, and they were all at different points in their life cycle, right? We were literally like forming some of them, like literally like, putting in the paperwork to Delaware. We were doing fundraising and financings on some. We were doing M&A work on others. We were doing public issuances on others. We were, doing like a ramp phase. Like, but if you imagine that you've got this big array of companies that are in different phases of their life cycle, if you get to draw a line through all those, you get to see everything all at once. And so that's one of the really cool things about the kind of multi-threaded nature of the emerging company work is you basically get this amazing sampling across lots of different companies. So one of the challenges that you have when you do in-house work is you typically have one client, and so the variety of what you might see might be much lower. And getting a lot of really diversity of perspective and like different clients doing different things is just really valuable because it gets you to, I think that one of the things that we're kind of, we seem to be coalescing around is this idea of like iteration and lots of learning loops. And it gives you a lot of those tight learning loops across a broad corpus. So I think you're onto something.
interesting. Well, really great hearing about your experience at Heller, Ehrman, and Cooley. So, just over 3 years in big law, and I can't help but wonder since you focus so much on startups and high growth companies, you went to Microsoft. And so I'm curious how that transition came to be about where you've spent 15 years at now, by the way.
Yeah, I joined a 35-year-old startup, right? So I didn't expect to join Microsoft. I ended up joining Microsoft because so while I was at Cooley, I tried to make investments in the community, and one of the things I did was I think I did a panel at Seattle University, just talking about like my practice and my career, of which I had all of 2 years at that point, right? And I think one of the lessons for folks is no matter where you are, and I think, like, I'll let you, like, kudos to you. You are literally, kind of at the beginning of your career, but you've already amassed enough knowledge that you can share with other people. That is a lesson for everyone. Wherever you are, there is somebody who knows less than you. Now, I think you're putting this on, you're speed running this with your podcast, which I love, but it's a lesson for everyone, which is it at every phase, almost every phase of your life, you can offer uh, some kind of insight, knowledge, or wisdom to somebody who hasn't traveled as far as you. And here's the wacky thing: there is real value in that process, because what you do is in the process of reflecting, you actually codify your learnings for yourself. So the process of telling stories to others is this very powerful tool of actually reflecting and figuring out, like, what have I learned? And going through the process of having to articulate that to someone else is fantastic, because it teaches you all kinds of things like empathy and, like, distill out the nuggets, like, figure out how to have a coherent story, which I think I'm rambling now, so I'm not doing a great job. Laura, my point is, I was on this panel, and one of the other people on the panel was a recruiter at Microsoft, and at that point I was not really thinking about looking, but again, I got to minimum viable lawyer, and I'm like, I think I think I should probably go work in a company, like in an operating company. And I was just ended up going to this other kind of King County Bar Association young lawyers thing, and I helped organize it. And I saw this attorney. Her name is Elka Suber, speak, and she was just magnetic. And she worked at Microsoft, and I'm like, maybe I should think about Microsoft. So I ended up circling back to that recruiter, and I was like, "Hey, I found this job on the website. Like, do you know who's placing this? And, like, should I be looking at this?" And she's like, "Well, it so happens I'm placing that job." And she's like, "Let me go take a look at it." And so I didn't get that job because somebody else internal got that one. But she circled back a few weeks later, and she's like, "We have two roles that are opening up. Uh, one is conventional, the other is they're not really sure what it is. We think we wanna bring you in and dual track you and just see how it goes. Are you open to that?" I was like, "Yeah, sure." And so I came in, and I guess I did a not so terrible job that they were like, "Yeah, like, which of these do you want?" And I'm like, "I'll take the weird one." And the weird one ended up, being, counsel for this guy named Dave Campbell, who is just a old school legend. He was a deck guy, and what he was doing was putting together a team that was creating, I think, the company's first open source powered big data cloud service, back when those words didn't mean anything. And people were literally like, "Jason, we don't know what they're doing over there." And so I'm like, "Okay, so what does success look like?" And basically, what I took away from it was, well, you're kind of like an old time, like, ranger, and your job is to, like, just keep blood off the streets. Like, just do your best to, like, keep them moving in more or less a compliant direction, because they're iterating fast, and, like, literally we had not fully wrapped our arms around all the risks of taking dependencies on, like, these, like, all the things that people take for granted now. Like, I'm going to build a cloud service. I'm going to power it with this crazy open source licensed software. I'm gonna basically park massive amounts of data and do useful things with, like, we take that for granted now. It's like, "Oh, yeah, that's how you do stuff." 15 years ago, they were like, "Yeah, is this gonna work? Like, what kind of demand for," and it turns out, like, the hypothesis may have been proven out, and I think but, it was super fun because when you basically get to go make the future, and in many instances, law or interpretation of this is not settled, that's operating on the frontier, and that's fun. Like, that's serious fun. And to your other question, these were some hardcore engineers. Like, these were a bunch of systems folks, and, like, and so being able to really deeply understand what they were talking about, because I was still I still write software to this day. They like, it was incredibly valuable to be fluent in the things they were talking about because it's very hard to catch up and, like, understand and grok what's happening if you just don't have any grounding of, like, what the words mean. And so that was just super fun, and so that was my first job coming into the company.
That is insane. It sounds like you had a really good experience there. I mean, I'm just looking at your profile, and if I'm counting this correctly, you were promoted 10 times.
I don't know about 10 times. It's 5-ish? I don't
Okay.
know. Something I don't know. I
Still, I mean, pretty crazy. Um, I mean, what were you thinking? Because like, hindsight's always 2020, and obviously now you're associate general counsel, you are probably overlooking and managing a lot. So, I mean, in 2010, when you just got to Microsoft, like, were you thinking long term? What was your long-term strategy or plan?
My long-term strategy was, last 3 years and then go do something else. And one of the really interesting things about Microsoft is it's a big place with lots of opportunity, and you there is a surprising amount of internal mobility. And so if you do good work and you demonstrate good judgment, the ability to think, the ability to create value, be an effective team player, they will take risks on letting you do different stuff. And basically, if you look at, the things I've done, there's some pretty big swings in practice type. Let's embrace that they're even getting me in the door. I basically hustled my way from functionally a corporate lawyer, because like what you are as an emerging companies lawyer is you're a corporate lawyer who's also like a generalist, kind of handyman lawyer, and I got dropped into a fairly hardcore IP practice, which, let's be honest, I was not. I was not a tech trans person, and so I totally hustled my way in, basically saying like, there's a lot of analogies between the kind of transactions I did and the kind of stuff I do, and I had some benefits, some other things that we discussed, like the technical background, but like, so what I ended up doing was hopping whenever there was like a fork in the road, and it was like, well, there's something weird, which you're probably not qualified to do. I was like, then I'm interested. Let's go.
Yeah. I love that. And I mean, yeah, even just reading through this, I mean, you're interfacing with external firms, like law firm engagement strategy, like it was some of everything, right?
Yeah.
So maybe we can just like briefly walk through that. Like first you worked on Azure, and it looks like you're doing that for about 4 to 5 years. Is that accurate?
So let's go through this. So I started off in what was in the old days called the server and tools business, which is now cloud and Azure. And I was working on the data platform group, which again is like, think SQL Server and messaging servers and all kinds of fun like infrastructure servers, things like that. And I did that about a year. And then I moved to support the developer division, which was like a homecoming for me because I was literally supporting the developer tools that I used as a Java developer back in the day.
Wow.
And so DevDiv was awesome, like, because I'm like, yeah, I use your stuff. I love your stuff. And actually got back into doing more software development because, like, you want to play with the client's toys, and they make the best toys. So for example, this is going to be a little bit inside baseball, but like, so I used Visual Studio as a professional developer, and I was there when we decided to make a big investment to create Visual Studio Code, which I think people take for granted now. That like there's this like IDE that's open source built on Chromium, and like that was a revolutionary act. And there were some other things where I can't speak about it too loudly, but like where we took some pretty big bets on some things, and, like, integrated some things that now we take for granted, and realized, like, yeah, we can do that. We can license these things, we can make it work, and we can do it the right way so that it benefits the community. And so, I was there helping that business navigate that path of basically trying to leap over the innovator's dilemma of having a really, really big, successful business and being willing to cannibalize itself. And that's wild. That was so wild. So I ended up having that job supporting developer division. And then I had this obnoxious kind of pattern of saying like, yeah, yeah, but like, what else? And so I have this. There are many times here where I basically ended up signing myself up for doing two jobs for the salary of one, which is a terrible idea. I do not recommend it. But I ended up layering in leading the open source counseling team. So I had a vertical. So I had a business unit that I was effectively the mini, mini, mini general counsel for. And then I layered on leadership of the open source team, which so I ran a team which had a horizontal accountability. So, for example, we did all the diligence with for all the M&A. We set policy for the entire company. But one of the most interesting things that happened on that was we ended up doing this like fantastic partnership with some of the most clever and committed engineers I've ever seen to basically build a compliance. They built it, to be clear. Like we kind of described the risks and helped them figure stuff out. But they ended up building infrastructure that subsequently let the company compliantly transition through 5 orders of magnitude greater consumption of open source. Like scale, baby, like scale, right? And so that kind of stuff is fun. And then ultimately I did transition to create the law firm engagement strategy position in the company. That was like a new role where they're like, well, we spent a lot of money on outside counsel. We should probably figure out how to create more value from it. Like, that does sound like a good idea. So I built a small team for that. And then ultimately, again, this is one of these moments where I was like, yes, but what else? And they're like, well, how about you also take on legal operations? And so again, for the same amount of money, and so that's how I ended up leading the legal business operations and strategy team, which was a combination of kind of the business facing stuff where we engage with outside counsel, but also the basically the scale operation mechanism for the department. And then I did that for a while, and ultimately the general counsel was like, "Hey, I think we should spin you off so you can focus on digital transformation. See if we can speed that up." So I did that for a couple of years. And I built a specialty team for that, and that was super fun. And then ultimately I wanted to get back to, uh, like, uh, I wanted to get back into my practice, and I wanted to figure out how can I apply all these things I had learned about how to basically scale legal work effectively within a constrained set of resources. And that's what I was doing for the last year and a half or so. And I was GM and associate general counsel, leading a team that covers Microsoft's monetization and business planning function. And it has been some of the most rewarding work of my life. It is complex. It is massive. It is so impactful for the company. I thought I understood how Microsoft made money, and I didn't. And and so it is just so like if anybody is like a true business nerd, you should be very curious about basically packaging, pricing, licensing, and channel strategy, which sounds very dry. But if you want to understand how you rectify products into customer value that earns you the right to ask for money, that's kind of where the magic happens. Because on some level, like this is the challenge of being in an engineer led company. A lot of engineers think that the thing they make is its value is self-evident. It's, I made a thing. It's beautiful. You should want it. And what I would analogize is, well, there's a reason that when you go into a restaurant, there's a menu, right? The menu tells you the things that are on offer. It groups them together into logical chunks. It puts them into courses. So if you wanted to make a meal, you know what you want. It shows you the prices. Like there is real value in that process of effectively figuring out how to packaging. And then guess what? You can get that meal going into the restaurant, or you can get it from like, a delivery service. That's amazing. Like, yeah. So I think you get what I'm saying, but like it's like that business function is super interesting, and it is the the quality of the work. I went in with high expectations, and it exceeded that. And I got to work with just this amazing group of legal professionals and a business professionals. So it's just awesome.
Your passion is contagious. I mean, as you were going through your roles, you got more and more excited about each one, which is awesome to see. Um, I mean, I guess, did you have a favorite? It sounds like what you're currently doing now is what is like most intellectually stimulating. But yeah, I'm curious, like which one would you maybe have you enjoyed the most?
Oh, I mean, so 2 things. One, recency bias I'll probably push one to say the current, but also, like, it's probably appropriate to examine that each of these was something that was happening at a different place in my arc. And so it's probably not fair to say which was the favorite because like, there are seasons to things and I was not ready to do the job I have now when I came to the company. I will say that the what I the, jo- the last job I had at Microsoft was probably the most impactful from a like just the like what it meant for the business. It's that was pretty big.
Wow, love to hear it. Well, and absolutely amazing, Jason, taking us through your career. Really, really appreciate you sharing sort of the journey. Um, I know that there's some exciting news you shared with me before we started the podcast. So yeah, I guess sounds like you're moving to a different company. Is that correct?
That's right. I am joining Agiloft as the chief legal officer. Agiloft makes contract lifecycle management software, and I am beyond excited to be joining that pirate ship. Like, it is gonna be super fun. There are some amazing people there who I've known for years. They have fantastic customers, and it's not my place to spoil it, but, like, some of the investments that they're making are really gonna delight folks, and I think gonna do some special things with, what's coming online. And so if you take the combination of the customers who are, I think really delight in the product and the platform, the talent that's on board, and the ambition that's in front, like, I am beyond excited.
Congratulations. I mean, I loved hearing about your career. And I think like my biggest takeaway just in talking to you the last 40 minutes or so is like, man, just embrace discomfort. If you're given an opportunity, like jump into the water and take it, even if you're not prepared to do it. And I think like doing your best at it has like, it seems like really propelled you and given you a lot of opportunity. So even if you're not an MVL, most viable lawyer yet, you just got to go for it.
Mi I'd say, I hope I'm most viable now. When I started, I was just trying to get the minimum viable. But yes, you're right. Like, if you if you give it your best and you go after something and you really commit the best of what you have, you'll probably figure it out. Um, but it really requires commitment and conviction, but a lot of things are doable, and to your point, like, there is risk, right? Risk being the unknown. You can't guarantee the outcome, but if you prepare yourself for the journey and you basically get yourself ready to adapt and change and learn really, really fast, you'll probably figure it out.
Yeah, love it. Last question for you, and I know we couldn't end this interview without some sort of AI question being thrown in here. So, like myself and a lot of my colleagues in law school, like I'm like 2 years out before I practice. People who are coming in are more than 3 years out, and so the landscape is changing. I think a lot of folks are optimistic, but others are pessimistic about what that's going to look like. So I mean, with so much uncertainty, how would you advise current law students to prepare for entering the industry?
So I am going to be running a legal department where I am literally going to be defining the objectives in a way that is forward looking that I think may be instructive for people who are entering the profession. So what do I care about? Well, job number one, when you're, the CLO is protect the company and make sure you're protecting your customers. Like the integrity is critical because if people trust what you sell them, then they will keep coming back and they'll delight in what you offer. But where we have extreme discretion is how we do that. And that is what I think we can absolutely redefine. Specifically, if I create the circumstances for people to be rewarded because they build better mousetraps. They find more ways to deliver more value from their practice. And they basically figure out how to create business value that is more fit for what the company needs faster with lower input costs, then we all win. And that's what's on offer with machine intelligence, right? It requires moving from a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset. And like, so let's be real clear. If we think about like the resource envelope that I manage, the fundamental scarcity is human time, attention, and cognition. And what I'm trying to do is to blow up the old equation on that by creating leverage on machine intelligence, which will be plentiful. So the people who figure out how to solve problems that have strong legal nexus, which, by the way, lawyers have a great shot at, right? Like the people who figure out how to take the tools that are coming online and turn those into Superman capes, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for those folks. But let's go back to where we started. If your objective is to have the safe, conventional set of outcomes that existed for most of the existence of our profession, those some of those may be some of those will be available, right? But it may not be the same proportion. And it may be that increasingly you have a new class of opportunities that start waking up and are available for those who want to think differently and think about how to compose their legal skills with the capabilities that are coming online. Again, this is where I think that having some technical training is incredibly valuable. Here's why. So I spend a lot of time using a whiteboard. And what I'm trying to do is take the things that are out of my head, or sorry, take the things in my head out of my head and project them into a shareable, declared form so that we can basically figure out how to turn those into workflows, right? What I'm really talking about is a form of metacognition, trying to like introspect, to decompile. How do I think about something? How do I choose? What are the steps that I take? What are the features that are dispositive? Like, how do I discriminate between this and that? People who have the ability to project that out of their heads and effectively nest that into machine intelligence are going to have superpowers. And the thing I have seen so many legal professionals uh, take solace in that I don't think is going to be a refuge in the future are things like I didn't go to law school to do math, and well, what I do is different every single time. It may be true that what you do is different every single time, but there are pieces to what we do every day that are declarable and knowable and will soon be able to be offloaded reliably and safely to machine intelligence. And so this is the one thing that I will offer to people to think about on this, which is the reason that the change will be difficult is not for the reason that most people think. Because what I observe is that most of the difficulty of change are a set of sociological challenges masquerading as technical challenges.
Interesting.
And so, you know, it is basically like, do you have the will to get on board and go? If you do, you will figure it out. But that does require effectively participating and figuring stuff out. Again, it's everything we've talked about before, just applied to a slightly different domain of problems. There's this really, really interesting case study that I would commend to your audience, written by this gentleman named Elting Morrison, and he basically examined gunnery, naval gunnery, late 1800s, and there were this plucky set of officers who figured out how to solve this problem. So when you're on a boat and you have a gun and the gun is off the boat rocks, and so the gun misses frequently because it's raising and lowering. And so they actually figured out a much smarter way to effectively keep the gun level and have, I think they ended up producing like a 3,000% increase in accuracy. And it turns out that it took something like a half decade for the Admiralty to accept this reality. And the reason was not because of any kind of technical challenge. It was because all the status systems that said what was good pointed in the other direction. And so the challenge that you are going to see is all these people who have more power and status than you, who won the game, they're going to have a hard time reorienting around the idea that there's this guy named Ali who's running around the office with a super hero, capabilities that I don't trust because I don't understand. And oh, by the way, we're not rewarding it because again, all of our status systems are built for the other thing. I'm su I To be clear, I'm sure Cooley will be much, much, much better than on this than most of these at first. But I think you get my meaning, which is if you don't rewire the sociological elements of your organization, then basically what you have is the gravity pulling people back towards the old thing. And then what they'll do is just like, oh, well, the technology's not there, or it's too hard, or blah, 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 I don't like it. So I realized that was a long, rambling response to your question, but that is what I would offer as a more complete thought to people entering the profession to both embrace the change, invest in it, figure it out for yourself, but also understand why you're going to see resistance. And do not presume that it is just a technical situation. The human factors are what you're going to be bouncing into.
Super interesting. I think it's 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 a good reminder. Like change has always been constant, and it's just about how you think about it, or it's you have to. I don't know. It's things aren't that much different from when the internet came around or when other types of technology came around. Would that be accurate to say?
I remember being flying back to school from home in a cab in Boston. I think it was 1997, and the cabbie's like, "Yeah, that internet thing, like that failed, right?" So yeah, I think there is, history doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes.
But on that note, Jason, I really, really appreciate your time. I think this was like one of the most valuable sessions of that I've ever had. So I really appreciate all your insights. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm grateful that you made the time to chat, and I hope our conversation has value for folks.